Welcome to another inspiring episode of Compassion and Cannabis. I'm your host, Tara Purcell, and today we have the privilege of welcoming a remarkable guest, Nobia Kubby. Nobia is not only a dedicated mother, but a patient, but also an extraordinary activist who's tirelessly fought for the betterment of cannabis. In this special episode, we shine a spotlight on Nobia's remarkable journey, her unwavering commitment to the cannabis movement, and her role as the wife of late pioneer Steve Kubby. Together, they forged a path of compassion, advocating for access, understanding, and change. Nobia's unwavering dedication to the cause stems from her firsthand experience of the transformative power of cannabis. And with Steve, her partner, she embarks on a lifelong mission to ensure that patients like herself and countless others have access to the healing properties of this plant. So as we delve into Nobia's story, we celebrate her strength, resilience, and unyielding determination to make a difference. She carries forward Steve's legacy, continuing their fight for justice, compassion, and the rights for patients. So join us as we explore the extraordinary journey of Nobia Kubby, reflecting on the challenges she's overcome, the victories she has celebrated, and the profound impact she and Steve had on the cannabis community and beyond. This episode is a testament of power, of love, advocacy, and the unwavering belief in the healing potential of cannabis. It is a tribute to Nobia's unwavering commitment and her role carrying the torch of compassion in the face of adversity. So welcome to Compassion and Cannabis, where we celebrate the unwavering commitment of individuals like Nobia Kubby, who have dedicated their lives to the betterment of the cannabis movement. So join us as we honor the tireless advocacy and love of Nobia Kubby, an extraordinary woman who has fought for access, understanding, and compassion in cannabis. This is a special episode dedicated to the incredible journey of Nobia Kubby and Steve Kubby and their dedication and unwavering activism, who continues to make an impact in the realm of cannabis activities. So get ready for an insightful and heartfelt conversation as we shine the light on Nobia Kubby's remarkable contributions and unwavering dedication to the movement. Nobia, thank you for joining us on Compassion and Cannabis.
Oh, it's so good to be here. I've taken part of my journey with the two of you, so that's what makes it really special.
Blessed be.
And welcome to my outdoor studio on Steve's favorite spot on our deck. I just felt like I wanted to be with the trees, and maybe we can invoke Steve in here, and I'm sure he's always with us.
Yes, absolutely. And Steve is a pioneer, in all of this. It's acknowledging that we stand on the shoulders of giants and we don't have this freedom for nothing. It came with a fight. It came with a battle. It came with the prisoners of war and the patience of which this industry was built on. So we do honor this episode to Steve, as well as all those other pioneers who've embarked on this journey and making these changes. Nobia, as the wife of late Steve Kubby, a pioneering advocate, can you share with us the journey you and Steve embarked on together in this fight for cannabis access and understanding?
Yeah, so I came in really late in his life is in terms of that stretch between first diagnosis of a deadly adrenal cancer, metastatic pheochromocytoma, which is in simpler terms adrenal cancer. And when it's malignant, it's deadly. I mean, even without the malignancy, it's a very difficult condition to live with because it's a constant high blood pressure attacks. So that's really where his journey started. And then he walked through a long timeline of activism and work on Prop 215 at the core group. And then he went on to patent the first cannabis plant, patent the lozenge, started the first second public company, and then started another public company, which is where I walked in when he needed some help with Kush Incorporated, and I came and applied for a job. And so he needed a personal assistant to help him track things. And it was obviously love at first sight. We really had a lot in common because really what he was telling me at my interview when we were first meeting was all about his kids' ecology camp that he had started. And I was myself a teaching major, working with kids with disabilities and a lot of kids with severe autism. And so we know where that leads. You start to realize how much cannabis helps children with autism and starting to deal with the legal entanglement kids run into when they want to bring their cannabis. Mothers want to make sure, severely autistic kids are, and I was going into special education. So and then I kind of mixed that with ecology because I thought that helped kids with disabilities to learn, in a place-based a curriculum. And voila, there was Steve who was doing it. And while he was doing his eco camp for children in the early 70s, went a visionary at that, because that was diagnosed with the pheochromocytoma. And he had been friends with Cheech Marin before Cheech and Chong were famous. And Cheech came up to do one of the hikes up to the top of Shasta that he would do at the end of every summer camp. There would be this pinnacle, climb to the top of Shasta. And so they were up there together, just chilling. And, he's not really supposed to smoke. Cheech was like, go home and do what will make you feel better. Forget what the doctors are telling you. You've been given a life sentence of, 2 to 5 years. Um, and when he did, he was kind of, he was in this position where he couldn't risk his school. And so his cannabis use, and this was the early 70s too, let's also remember that Nixon had legalized it at the turn of that decade, the beginning of that decade, had made it illegal. So he was kind of, you know, he was tormented. So he took his friend's advice and went back home and started smoking the weed and realized, oh my God, I've been depriving myself of the thing. And, they smoked weed in college together. That's where they met, they were college roommates. And so, I actually remembers Cheech trying out a lot of his stuff on him. So he went back and just started medicating and realized, oh my God, this is stopping my high blood pressure attacks. And so one thing led to another. He did that school for a decade. And then, he had like 5 or 6 surgeries to remove tumors. And then he eventually um, got to where he got cannabis into his diet as a mainstay. What he didn't have to deal with the kid issue anymore and any risk of losing his school. He For many years, cannabis was working, so he way outlived the diagnosis, death sentence, and eventually met up with Dennis Perone and became a patient, number 25, with, I believe, that's what Dale Scott Jones told me. Oh, he was patient number 25, but she was over on the Oakland side. So there were kind of like two camps, but they were all working towards trying to get cannabis unrestricted for at least patients at the time. So Steve became a patient through the Cannabis Buyers Club, probably, and started working with Dennis. Though immediately they saw that, well, here's this guy. Because he went on and used his journalism next. So he was writing a book, Politics of Consciousness, on psychedelics and their use throughout the ages. And he was working with Timothy Leary. Consulted with Timothy Leary. Terrence McKenna wrote the foreword on the book, and one thing led to another, and he gets with Dennis Perone, and they realize, oh my God, this guy's really a good writer, speaker. So I think he found his niche. He didn't write Prop 215. That was written by the attorneys and the doctors. I think everybody weighed in on Prop 215 at one point or another, but somebody misquoted that and said, oh, Steve wrote it. And no, he didn't. He was there really campaign connected with the funds and the people that took it to the ballot. I mean, it had a really good thrust. The polling was strong. It was in the 70, upper 60, 70% that people wanted some kind of regulation, at least for patients. And so he connected literally, he didn't know George Soros, but he got to George Zimmer, who got to George Soros, who got the $2 million to start by getting signatures, getting it to the ballot box, and then advertising, getting it on the ballot, and then advertising for the constitutional amendment of Proposition 2215. So that's where he really had showed his strength, was connection and fierce advocacy. And so all of these great things he did were way before me. So I appreciate the fact that you mentioned that I do have a huge responsibility. That's an incredible legacy. And I don't think it's something that, I think that since we do stand on the shoulders of giants, again, another really perceptive way to coin that, it's important for us to get these stories out. So I first want to thank you for having me on the show. It took me 15 minutes to get there, uh, but I do thank you for doing this, because I think it's really important that we don't forget those stories, and those people have been passing. I mean, many of them were patients to start with, so they were already dealing with a challenge in life. But also, I mean, Prop 215 was passed 30, almost 30 years ago. So, no, 215, 2 years ago. So it's been 27, getting close to 30 years. So it's been a long time. And those people were working in the trenches years before that. So,
Right.
people are also just, aging. But Steve passed away November 20th at this last year in 2022. And he turned 76 in December, if he were to have lived. So he really almost got to 76, which is remarkable, since at age 20 he was given 2 to 5 years to live.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right. Incredible. And the use of cannabis oil extended his life.
Yeah, and he actually found, I mean, he did do oil, but he found smoking because he needed the instant relief, similar to people that have like epilepsy or, I mean,
Mhm.
oil, of course, works for a long period, but I don't know about you guys. I know Justin worked a lot with people with epilepsy, but with Steve, I could give him a tincture. Not always, but sometimes I could slow down or lessen the effect of a epileptic seizure. But also, like Parkinson's, he also got stage 4 Parkinson's when he had some bad meds, and we smoking would give him instant relief on the shaking, on the high blood pressure attacks, and all of the symptoms that he had. So if he smoked, and in fact, since he had several different cases throughout the years, one in California and one in Canada when he was a cannabis refugee in the early 2000s. And they tried to bust him and get him out of the country, because he was a really high profile candidate. I mean, he wasn't making it quiet at all. I had to come to Canada to be a refugee so I could keep doing my cannabis. And so, of course, they, governments always tend to attack those noisy guys, to shut them up. But they couldn't, because in both cases, doctors testified in for Steve that he needed at least 12 joints a day just to keep from having those blood pressure attacks escalate. It might only keep and his blood pressure could just ride at like 130, which is still very high to live on, but they weren't spiking over 200s, which is, I watched some attacks just go, I mean, you just like, I mean, I can't even believe he's still alive. And then you can't get cannabis into somebody unless medical technology changes with the use of cannabis. I'm sure we could get it into people's IVs when they're, stroke victims and whatnot. But until medical technology and regulation advances, I would name that as part of my journey with Steve, was trying to get him the raw cannabis. Eventually, he found raw cannabis to be THCA, and CBGA and CBDA were his best friends. And
Wow.
whatever unknown water soluble cannabinoid and entourage effect that, combined, it was the raw cannabis that he later learned that put him back into remission for 9 years. 9 years. So when I met him, he was in remission, and that's what Kubby, rather Kush Incorporated was doing, was the cryogenics, and then they they went in the direction of the lozenge that he had already patented with the actual strain that he. Then we went off and spun off Kubby Cryogenics because he really wanted to push the water soluble. And based on Raphael Masholam's research on the entourage effect, but many of his encouragement that people continue to investigate the water soluble cannabinoids and the entourage effect and the terpenes. And I think they are being underused because, I mean, it put him in remission, an endocrinological condition, uh, being adrenal cancer. But I have an endocrinological condition, and I was doing the cryogenics, and I felt remarkably better, remarkably better. And
Wow.
then once Prop 64 was passed, I couldn't even get a more commercial sized machine sent here. I could only get one of those little small hash extractors because that's basically what we're talking about. I'm sorry, that's part of the downfall of the outdoor. The outdoor studio is nature and airplanes. Everybody's coming to Tahoe, but yeah, I mean, it inhibited his ability to get the exact method he was using, which was he was just extracting it in like a Zen port, something that would just, you could freeze the chamber of the a thing that just kind of like a washing machine, a hash washing machine, where you agitate, remove the trichomes, and then they collect together. And they even had a little bit of the green material on it, and he would eat that by the spoonfuls
Oh,
every
wow.
day. Yeah, and he was in remission. He was skiing 2 million vertical miles one year that he was doing this. He looked his best. He looked unbelievably young and just so good. And that's when I met him. And then Prop 64 just made it more our machine that happened and life changed. And then he got really sick. So you're not out there extracting your own medicine when you're really sick. Maybe your wife can, but you're not doing it. And this is where 64 people don't think about those nuances. It's like it put us back pre Prop 215 days for medical patients, I feel.
Can you explain just a little bit more for maybe those who don't understand what 215 is to 64 and the differences that it really has and impacted?
Proposition 215, like 64, was a constitutional amendment. Anytime you propose proposition to your state legislator or to the state elections office, a proposition that's it gets put on the ballot, and you're proposing to the voters that you want to make a constitutional amendment, and so to your state constitution. So 215 embedded rights for patients to get medication when they need it, especially when they were terminal. And later on, Proposition 215, since it survived 20 years before Prop 64 went to the ballot, um, had many different legislative amendments, or I should say, corrections to the amendment, where we had to actually and embed a code, the health and safety code, so we could form collectives. And then we had SB 420, a Senate bill that put in more constitutional, strengthen the Constitution, saying that these people have it in, and it's a right in their constitution. We should stop, rating these, and we should have standards for rating the collectives, because a lot of police activity obviously cropped up around different collectives in Prop 215. And then eventually we got the Attorney General guidelines that really strengthened a search. And so all of that came prior to the adult use. And we worked hard for all of those constitutional strengthening activities to our constitutional amendment of Prop 215. But when Prop 64 came along, of course, everybody wanted to make it legal for everybody. Had to go get a medical card, for periods. And it was a joke. It became a joke, oh, yeah, I just told the doctor I got headaches, and so I smoked cannabis. Well, if you look back at some of the things that Dennis Perone wrote, we're all patients. Every single one of us are patients. So I think Dennis he would have preferred that 215 was embedded in both an adult use and a patient. But, we are now with Prop 64, which is not superseded Proposition 215. What they do need to do is make the two together in tandem. And they really haven't quite done that. But I know that there are legislative attempts. But Prop 64 now provides for the adult medical cannabis. And that's for everybody. What a lot of patients feared, and I see actually happening, is when they allowed it for adult use. And again, it was a constitutional amendment. And within the proposition, they did say, medical use and Prop 215 would still be a choice of law, and it would still be valid. The way they regulate adult use makes it really difficult for patients again. And then we got to go back to where we were, 25 years ago, where, we're paying growers, as we have to do, because we live in Tahoe and you can't grow year round here. So we still have to rely on patient 215 medical grow. So that I can obtain 2 pounds or 4 pounds at harvest, and I can then dole out and say, we're going to use these for lozenges. We're going to use this for, edibles, and then we're going to use this for smoke. So Prop 64 didn't do much to help us medical patients. So if I now want to go to a dispensary and find Steve's Cryogenics, unless Steve was able to market it and get it into a dispensary, I can't find that. So now I have to rely on methods used to do that at home. And what I found was now commercial machines can't be shipped to my house. They have to be shipped to a licensed facility. So it just encumbered the whole process and gave us a whole bunch of new problems. But I would have to say, according to the actual black letter law, Prop 64, Proposition 64, the adult use proposition, did embed, whether poorly or not, Proposition 215, and it did may have encumbered it, but it incorporated it into Prop 64, because when you go to a dispensary, you can still use your medical card and get saved on taxes, and you get slightly different allowances. You don't have, to be able to get more medicine, but not quite like people like Steve need it, right? I mean, we need that 4 pounds up front at the beginning of the after harvest.
Right.
So it still means I got to go out and and think about it. We are so dialed in to the industry, and we still have trouble. I'm thinking to myself, well, geez, if I didn't know all these people, what would I do? What
Right.
would I do? So it really does beg the question. We have to keep advocating for those people that don't have the benefits of
Mhm.
knowing how to grow. I mean, I could grow myself, but very expensive. Very expensive. I finally turned it into an office. Costs like 800 a month to run.
Yeah.
So it was just too expensive for us up here with our cold winters. It just wasn't worth it. Plus all the spider mites, all the animals run into our garage and bugs run into our garage anyway during winter. So you can imagine what, and you just don't want to be dealing with that. I want a sun grown organic medicine. So anybody that's not in the know and or is not in a good area, still going to have to go back to where we did this 25 years ago, seeking out somebody who will hold our patient card and take the risk and grow the medicine.
Amazing that that's where we're at, even though we're so far ahead.
Yeah,
It's like
so
two
far
steps
ahead that we dialed one part of it back, and it's really going to take people like you and I, and Justin, and many of our friends that we know to, and I, now that Steve is gone, um, I feel his spirit pushing me and saying, keep going.
Yeah.
And I think we do need to form a pack and raise money and develop a relationship with legislators and and do something in the state of California where we already have so much of a laboratory already, a legal laboratory, a policy laboratory with so many years of regulating medical cannabis and then adult use, and do it here, and then hopefully get it codified on a national level. But fix all of the things that we know to be broken about it, that we see coming in potential
Mhm.
federal regulation. I mean, you already know Marlboro. We were so fearing Marlboro farms, right? That Marlboro was going to come in and buy and do, Walmart weed.
And
And it's happening.
it is, it is,
With
there's
different
those hemp
names.
sticks on the market, and they're packaged just like a cigarette. They
Yep.
unwrap just like it, and you take it out, and it's as nasty as one too, I won't lie, like, and it's rolled on the same machines as the tobacco with Marlboro. Like, it's
Yeah.
amazing how they see it and how they're tapping into it, but, let's not underestimate those filters that are on that thing. That filter is deadly. That paper is deadly. Like, it's I don't recommend the hemp sticks like produced by your Marlboro company. So just also stay in tune of what product you're purchasing, where it is coming from, whether it's tested or not. But even that's a privilege in a lot of people's
Mhm.
world, like because there are so many of us going black market because the dispensaries cannot provide really what is needed for patient care. And that is the difference.
And that's the difference. So it makes patients like us go back and say, "Well, where are you? help me help me get this done." And in my case with Steve, and I want to continue to do the cryogenics because I know it made me feel better, and I'm like, "Well, wait, this is a no-brainer." I had the greatest scientific experiment. I was married to one. I mean, he's the longest living person with pheochromocytoma. And I can't even believe we were working with UC Davis and UCSF that they didn't want his body. They didn't want to study him further and find out, okay, how did this guy live this long? And what's happening to him as he's getting
Yeah.
into 72, 73, 74? Oh, uh, 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 multivascular dementia. Well, that's what you're dealing with. He
Hmm.
had vascular attacks that hammered him all his life. I mean, what a laboratory of understanding and investigation they had at their disposal while he was alive, and nobody chose to pick it up. And I would ask them, well, okay, call the school, but they do all of the research. Well, you can recommend it.
Right.
You're there, right there. You're the doctor. You're treating him. You turn his records over with a recommendation. When I what I write an email that gets. I don't know if you still heard my audio, but my screen disappeared.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Oh, there
back
you go again.
to the whole idea behind research, doctors still and researchers still have their hands tied.
Yeah,
So
absolutely, they do.
we're,
You know, can I ask you, as a patient yourself, how cannabis personally maybe impacted your life as well? And do you have any specific moments and experiences that highlight your transformative power as well on this plant journey?
well, it definitely gave me a lot of relief when I didn't know I had cancer first because my thyroid was malfunctioning. And so, endocrinologically speaking, I was anxious. I was um, shaky a lot. I couldn't eat. So, it helped with my appetite. Everybody was trying to send me to a psychologist for, eating disorders, and I was like, no, I'm just not hungry. Nobody thought to check my thyroid. And then when I got pregnant, they found, oh, she's got a nodule on her thyroid. And then it
Oh, wow.
led to me being diagnosed with thyroid cancer. So leading up to it, I used it, and we were in the dark. We had to that was in the 80s, so it was still illegal, and nobody wanted. Well, it was decriminalized in California. You could have less than an ounce. So I mean, I wasn't worried about holding a joint, but we certainly weren't, growing pounds in our backyard. Well, we were. So we just did what we thought was right at the time, and I think my first husband also needed it for PTSD because he was a Vietnam veteran and he was struggling a big time. I mean, he would have terrible dreams of being, he said his experience in Vietnam was like apocalypse now,
Oh,
So there
wow.
was just a lot of things to, terror, a lot of terror. So I think we both were using it medicinally and didn't realize we were sneaking it around, but it really was. We were just doing what we thought, what we knew made us feel better in the 80s. And then when I actually did go into the radiation treatment, we told our doctor, look, we're growing it in the backyard and I'm doing cannabis because this is what's helping. And he said, absolutely. This is 1990, so pre, Prop 215 was passed in 96. And so he said, look, if you get into trouble, I can testify for you. But other than that, just you got to do what you got to do. So even my oncologist was, supporting me in that sense. But, that's kind of the paradigm at the time. We were seeing it coming, but it just hadn't been there yet. But if it hadn't been for cannabis, I wouldn't have gotten the relief that I got. And um, then, of course, post 215, then I started having my kids after the, number two was born right at the diagnosis. And then I had two more. So I had four children. So lucky me, I was able to, finish having my family, raising them and finishing my degrees. That was the other thing. It was like, oh, yay, now I can go to college. I'm not going to die. So I did enter college later in life because, I had to get past that pre-post cancer struggle. But yeah, I mean, it was a natural thing to do. When I was growing up in the 60s because he was just an old hippie. So I didn't have to also bust all of those myths. My parents knew it was okay. And, we all smoked pot together just as a family. So you can't, I mean, I didn't have a prejudice. So I didn't have to break down those barriers, which was good. It just was like, I have to just hide the truth from the government. But they also, blacklisted my dad for his work in the civil rights and the, and the, you know, civil rights and anti-war movement. So I was already used to, having that monkey on my back, or feeling like the monkey was on my back, but I'm going to do what I'm going to do anyway, right? In spite of it. But I just don't know how other people have to face prejudice from their family members, from their, group organizations, whether it's a religious or, their teachers. I couldn't really be an honest teacher anymore when I was going through my teaching program, when my second husband, Rennie Monterey, he eventually did get colon cancer, and it really was from Vietnam, because he was in the area where they sprayed Agent Orange,
Wow.
and he dealt directly with napalm, and there's a high rate of colon cancer, but the veterans didn't recognize it, the Veterans Administration. However, him being a patient, us continuing to grow it in our backyard, I was like, this is now the age of Facebook and internet. And, they were all saying, don't get caught, with something, you do in your private life being found out because of the internet, And then I was like, well, geez, I can't even be an advocate for him quietly, because that could be interpreted by somebody in the community, and then they're going to turn me into the school. And I had to choose. I was like, well, I'm getting into a career as a teacher, but I know the truth. And I really know the truth because, my dad already was kind of fighting that whole Nixon era.
Right.
And so, you know, I'm going to take a policy turn, and I'm just going to go, work in policy. And eventually it led me to law school. So instead of getting my graduate degree as a teaching credential, I just went ahead and went to law school and began to advocate. And then I could be more honest about, because now my husband had passed away in 2010, and even cannabis then, if I knew now if I was able to learn now, through Steve, maybe we could have saved him. But, he did edibles, and he did, whatever he did, and he outlived his prediction of diagnosis, because he had massive tumors in his liver. So it had already metastasized to his liver. It was in his gut. It was in his colon. He got a bunch of colon removed, and then it was also in his lung, which also could have been from you know uh, other things that happened in his life. But who knows? It was just all over his body, and he still lived 5 years. So yeah, so this was 2010. So can you imagine? Cannabis impacted my life to the point where not only did it help me live, but I actually had to make a career change. I had to make a career change because I knew the and then that became, how I got with Steve. And it's so serendipitous, because, now it's about his legacy for me, and Rennie's legacy, because if it hadn't been for my journey with him, and then subsequently with Steve,
Yeah.
those are life-changing events. So you can't live in the dark, and you can't be quiet about it. And I think that might be the one thing that I do feel is good about Prop 64 and the awareness that the country is starting to gain, is at least now we can talk about it. We can joke about it. It's not just, the Cheech and Chong, up in smoke, the van filled with smoke.
Right? Is
you
that blessed?
know?
Yeah, I love seeing the stigma change, the fact that we can have these conversations, and even if people aren't using it, they're open to hearing about
Yeah,
it with
they're like, oh yeah, so what, you
prejudice.
do that. Or Snoop Dogg and Martha Stewart. Who thought?
Right?
Who
Right?
could have guessed that one?
I love it. I love it so much. It's so
I
good.
know.
That's awesome. You know, advocacy work often involves a lot of engaging with lawmakers and policymakers, and you've mentioned this, How do you navigate the political landscape to create meaningful change and influence policy decisions regarding cannabis access and patients' rights?
Well, I think since when I went to law school, after Rennie passed away, and I was talking to a friend, and I said, "Yeah, I'm still growing in my greenhouse." And he came over and took a look, and he was like, "I'll help you grow more, and let's start a collective, and let's do this." And we were already knew we were going to go to law school, that we were going to be cohorts in law school. So what we did at the time, I think, was a really good move. He made some mistakes in his life, and that's another story. But one thing he did was he said, you got to get in front of it. You got to get in front of it. And so what we did is we made it a, you know bi-monthly habit. Every time city council met, we practiced our oratory skills. We did a little research, and we went in and we each would make a speech at city council in that 2-3 minute public hearing. Then we could also go back and look at ourselves on camera too. It was also helpful to see how we did. It was a great feedback loop, and it actually worked. And I'm from I lived on in Marina on the Monterey Peninsula, originally from Los Angeles, but I moved to Marina to raise my family, Monterey Peninsula. That's the former Fort Ord, and it's also a very strong military community. There is an intelligence battalion there. There's multiple language and spy schools. I mean, they call them language schools, but all spies have to be, bilingual and or not bilingual, but have to speak several languages. So, we call them language schools, but they were spy schools. So we had a heavy military presence in Monterey County. And so what we didn't know is what we were fighting an uphill battle. But we went ahead and did it. We're in law school, first night of law school. Why you want to be here? Because I want to legalize marijuana, because I'm a cancer survivor, I'm a cancer widow, and I have a collective. I went right out in front, you know, and the assistant district attorney was my criminal law teacher. So it was totally bold face. And then, of course, city council, and doing all kinds of demonstrations. Like I brought basil in, that I would show people how they could grow their garden, and they could. And then I got this big collective where I had several growers around the peninsula just growing in their backyard, and we distributed the medicine. And the more attention that we got at city council, the more, like a reporter would call us and say, well, I such and such, like when they did the bans, when they allowed collectives to be banned in certain counties. That was a big time where we got a lot of immediate attention, like, well, what do you guys think? So then we would go and stand in front of the law school and like, well, get the footage. It was ballsy, and he was the one with balls. I'm going to give him credit for that, but I'm glad he taught me how to speak your truth. I was afraid because I had learned to be afraid from my first husband, who was not, also, by the way, was not a citizen of the United States. He fought in the Vietnam War. He was a permanent resident, but he wasn't a citizen of the United States. So there was always this, we got to hide this. We don't want, him to face deportation or anything like that. And so because of my career choice to teach and his status, I had a lot of fear in me. And I think that my partner in the collective helped me bust that by just getting in front of everything. And then we became, even though kind of infamous in that sense, eventually it was a no-brainer for Monterey County anyway, but a chocolate factory opened up in Salinas. And the attorneys, of course, got together. They let us go out and just get busted and everything. I got raided and whatever, and they knew that would happen. But eventually they all got together and wrote some legislation so that we could get something Monterey County. And that of course, served the medical community until Alma was passed. And then, by the way, Steve D'Angelo, who owns, was the CEO of Harbor Freight. I have a little puppy trying to break my connection here. He went in and put a lot of greenhouses in Monterey County. They converted their flower greenhouses into medical cannabis greenhouses. Turned around. I'd like to think that, being the clown that I was and getting out there and, I kind of, shoot me first, because I did take a lot of beating for that. I did. I got busted for one thing. I mean, I didn't get busted. I got raided. And then I had, because I was in law school and I worked with a normal chapter attorney as an intern. He showed me how to set up a book and to walk the cops through it. And that's exactly what I did. I had this great book that had all my documentation in it, my collective agreements, my collective, along with the patient 215 certificates, and then above each plant I had all of my Prop 215 patient certificates above the plants. And so they did not take those plants. They only took the ones that were getting sun on the deck, and some that I was transferring to one of my other collectives that were on the side. They were coming to pick them up that day. So yeah, I know. So those got taken, and then some of my mothers that were getting sun on the deck, I took them away from their script and had them on the deck, and they got those. Darn it, those were my best plants. But they left everything else that was behind a thing, and then they charged my driver, so I never got charged.
Oh wow!
And then it got dropped because I refused to testify. So without my testimony, they just had no case. And we also did a pitches motion, by the way, if you're having trouble. Find out if you got dirty cops working on your case. We did, and we had dirty cops. So we won our pitches motion. So it's a motion you can file to get, if you have probable or are dirty, then you can get it, and you have to show that to the judge. Like, well, we know this about the police, and we know that about the police that were investigating our case. We'd like to see if they have any other problems on their record. And ours were selling, coke to dealers in jail. They were really dirty.
Wow.
So that really killed their case, and then the lack of evidence thereof after that. So, because they couldn't take my plants because I followed the guidelines. So at least you could say eventually, at least that was one time when law enforcement had to, and they already knew who I was, because I was already going out there making a stink literally for years by then, publicly. So when you get out in front, of it, it's really hard. And you hear this all the time with other kinds of things where people say, just get in front of the problem, and it's going to be real hard for them to, to make a case against you when you're coming out and making your case first.
Right.
Make your case with your, right? It's kind of like making your case with your public first, and then garnering public. And I feel like I had heard Steve's story before. It's really easy to say that when you get with them, like, oh, I'm sure I've heard this before. But I really do think I heard it because I was a cancer survivor. And maybe it was when he was running for office, because he did run for governor in 98 and president in 2008. And another libertarian candidate made the general election in 2008. But he was one of the three main candidates in the 98 gubernatorial race. So, Democrat, Republican, and Libertarian, the Steve on a cannabis platform.
Yeah, and you can see his book he wrote during that time too, Politics of Consciousness. So find it, read it, educate yourself, learn a little more, and take it on.
Yeah, and I'm going to try and get that one done on audio. I'm going to you
Oh,
know, maybe
wonderful.
I'll do the audio for it. Maybe I'll
Yeah,
read it, but I'm gonna find out how I can get it on audiobooks. That was suggested by somebody, and I thought, what a great suggestion, because a lot of
really.
people just have their accounts and they can download anything for one cost a month. And we're a very mobile society. We're all, either always in the car, always,
Mhm.
or we're working out or doing
Yep,
housework and working. We're getting used to working all the
and
time, unfortunately. But in some ways, this is an easy way to get, your education while you're busy. And
yeah.
audiobooks are great. And it's an easy read, though, if you choose to pick it up. He did
Mhm.
all the illustrations in it. And he was a very simplistic, when he spoke, he was a complex man, and he had a tremendous vocabulary and eloquence to his speaking. And I was told by one of his campaign managers that he could write a speech for him or have a speech written for him. Steve would read it and then just set it down, walk out, and deliver it just so beautifully in his own words. So he had a way of putting things very simple so that everybody could understand. Maybe that was the teacher in him. And so it's a real easy read. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Is there like if is there a spot people can find this? Can they go online and find this
Yeah,
book?
easy. It's on Amazon, just Politics of Consciousness, Steve. You'll probably find it first on Amazon, but there's some other booksellers that are selling it. I have copies, so I'll sign one if you want to set it up. If anybody texts you and says that they want a copy, I reserve most of my copies for people that have done things, like you and Justin. Probably already have a copy, but if you don't, you'll get another. Just let me know. But we figure something out.
Blessed be. Yeah, absolutely. Finally, Nobia, what message or words of inspiration would you like to share with our listeners who may be facing their own challenges in accessing cannabis medicine or advocating for change? And what advice do you have for those who want to make a difference in their community?
Don't give up. Network. That's the only way you and I have been able to survive this, is to remain. I mean, network. The strength of our networking has kept us in touch all these years. And so networking continues to be, and then join organizations that you feel are doing
Yeah,
um, the right thing for patients. There's a lot of organizations out there.
absolutely.
Um, but by networking, you're going to learn which one fits for you. And don't give up, because that it's easy. It's discouraging, especially when your health is giving you challenges and you don't feel good. I
Yeah,
don't feel good today, and I don't want my parents or my brothers and sisters or my in-laws think, I'm a drug addict. That's probably was the worst part about it. Thankfully, my family never did that to me because we were all old stoners.
mm,
But, even if some of them quit, they knew what I was doing when I snuck away at camping trips, hiding in the car. I might have hid it from the kids, but
natural rebellion.
but you just, I mean, I do remember the shame, and so if you can just, my experience was getting beyond the shame. Don't give up, and when you do feel well, you know, network and write.
Yeah,
Write your legislator, write your go in and speak at your local city council meetings. If they're blocking access,
absolutely.
is the worst thing we can do to patients. And so access is everything. I mean, that's really what this is all about, right?
Yeah, it
Conversation,
is.
access.
Yeah, having this conversation, making sure that our patients have safe access, showing up, use your voice if you're compelled in an area where you're at. You know, our pioneers paved the way through building a supportive and empathetic community.
Right.
It's actually crucial for the advancing the cause of cannabis compassion. So
Correct.
find strength in your compadres and within the cannabis community and nurture these connections and promote
Nurture them,
understanding.
and but key, using your voice, whether it's your voice or your pen or your texting, because that's the only way we're going to get awareness. How are people feeling? What do people need? What do we need to do to make this better for us in the future? I mean, my God, it should just be as simple as growing a tomato, shouldn't it?
It should be, actually.
Although I do like the testing. I do want to know, but integrity in testing, intellectual honesty in testing. What's our objective? How are we using that information? How are we using that data? But I learned a lot through testing, even at 215 level, because that's how we were able to patent the plant, is to discover and then to follow up on that with more research. So,
Yes.
And it's where I got Justin's name. I didn't get his name, but a funny story to end on. I was working with the one in Berkeley, starts with an S. There's a lab out there. Anyway, I'm going to move forward on the story. But I was like, I really want to look for a medicine maker. And he referred me to this Facebook page. And he said, there's a lot of, college kids there. They're doing a lot of great things. And I later, after I went and looked there, I saw Justin's name on there. And I was like, hey, he's already a friend of mine on Facebook. So I wrote him, hey, would you like to come out and talk to Steve and I? And that's how it started, with our connection with you. And Justin, yeah, totally a blessing, because you were already there. You were already there, but I just needed somebody to say, go back over here. And then I went and looked, I'm going to follow his advice. And I was like, hey, wait, look, this guy said something smart and he's already my Facebook friend. Hey, you. I might need your help.
I love it. And that's it's so important when you hear people or have a lead to someone who can provide you safe access, information, education, and help you understand the best path for healing. It's a really important factor when it comes to understanding how to heal.
Yes.
So embrace that community, embrace the information, educate yourself so that you can make these decisions, because it matters.
Totally.
So thank you, Nobia.
Oh.
We're going to bring this episode of Compassion in Cannabis to a close. I want to express my deepest gratitude to our incredible guest, Nobia Kubby. Nobia, your unwavering commitment to the cannabis movement, your resilience in the face of challenges, your dedication to carrying forward Steve Kubby's legacy has left an indelible mark on all of us. So again, I cannot thank you enough for sharing your journey as a mother, a patient, and an activist. This really showcases the transformative power of love and companionship in the pursuit of justice and access for all. So thank you. We're honored to have had the opportunity to learn from your experiences. So thank you, Nobia. To our listeners, I hope that Nobia's story has touched your hearts and reminded you of the power of compassion, resilience, and the fight for justice. Let us carry the torch of change forward, continue to advocate for accessible cannabis medicine, and understanding all patients. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nobia, again for sharing your wisdom, your insights, and enduring love that fuels your advocacy. Your presence on this episode has enriched us of understanding of the cannabis movement, as well as the profound impact it can have on individuals in our communities. So thank you again, dear listeners, for joining us on this transformative journey. Your support and engagement mean the world to us. And together, let's continue to spread compassion, advocate change, and celebrate resilience of the human spirit. So stay tuned for more inspiring conversations, stories on compassion and cannabis, where we explore the profound impact of cannabis on our well-being and the relentless pursuit of justice and understanding. So until next time, may compassion guide your path, and may the power of cannabis and advocacy bring healing, understanding, and positive change to all. Until next time, I'm your host, Tara Purcell.